Three, two, one, and we're live. And welcome to a brand new segment, or it's not exactly new. If you've stuck around my channel for a little bit, you would have remembered that we did something called Coffee Wednesday way back in the day. And I think my content schedule sort of realigned itself to allow me to do one of these segments again. So today we have a lot of housekeeping before we dive into the meat of today's video. And of course, which introduces a significant format change to my YouTube videos and to sort of explain the creative decisions behind this format change and to sort of like bring you guys up to speed to what the future of our content is going to look like. So this channel has been built upon the foundations of taking these one-take videos where it essentially started as a show where I just basically sat in my bedroom, I read something interesting, and I would rant about that interesting thing on for like 20, 30 minutes, and that was, a YouTube video. And a lot of you guys, I sent out a survey a while back, a lot of you guys really enjoyed a one-take format because you can listen to this stuff when you're making dinner, you can listen to this stuff on your drive to work, and of course I feel like a large part of the humanities is that we shouldn't really teach this kind of stuff by just reducing all of it down to just how-to, right? And I noticed myself doing a lot of those how-to videos recently. I feel like they're really helpful. They're really short for people in a hurry, and they're kind of accessible for people who's never seen my content. But for the loyal followers, I've been noticing that you guys weren't exactly as engaged with that style of content compared to our old kind of one-take format. So that's when I decided last year around October to kind of reintroduce that kind of one-take video. I sort of did some experimentation with it. The feedback has been quite great. A lot of you guys really enjoy that format. Some of you guys even said to me, "Welcome back, Robin." And I think that was all the clue that I needed to bring back the format. But at the same time, I had a few contractually obligated YouTube videos to get out of the way that kind of demanded that kind of jump cut format where I jump from one sentence to another sentence without really introducing anything in between to pad out those jump cuts. And I think especially if you're trying to communicate ideas that are connected with each other, especially if you're trying to talk about history's connection to philosophy or ways of reading, there's no way to encapsulate those videos into a 5 to 10 minute segment. And I just got really frustrated with myself that I needed to reduce all the discussions, all the free associations. Sometimes when I talk about a book, I might think of another field of studies and to draw those connections in. And I really enjoy doing that off the cuff. And of course, there's a bit of a document that I go off of, but they're just outlines. And the most interesting parts of doing what I do is to come up with those spontaneous connections on the fly. And that's what I really enjoy doing. So in a sense, this week's episode is going to jumpstart a different phase 2. So all those videos, contractually obligated jump cut videos, are now out of the way. I hope that you guys have enjoyed them. But essentially, this is how I like to do content. One take, talking about something interesting every single week. And the new format's going to feature one of these videos every Wednesday at around 6 p.m. in USA time. So I'm just going to go off of like a standard time, maybe in New York or something, around 6 p.m. your time and around 8 a.m. Thursday morning in Australia. So if you're in those time zones, match up your clocks. If you want to tune in, if you want to leave me some first minute comments, which I'll respond to every single one of the comments in the first hour of posting any one of these videos. So I really want to engage with your thoughts, with your interesting observations, and it's going to make a lot of space for us to expand our work here. And of course, we're working on a video set. We're kind of it's a mess behind that screen right now. I'm working on something, trying to expand the video set, trying to make everything look pretty. But here is essentially the new format. Every Wednesday, we're going to sit down, talk about something interesting. And if you want an audio feed of this, I'll also link an audio feed for every one of these episodes on my podcast by the name of A Mug of Insights, which is also my newsletter on Substack. And I'll talk about the newsletter another day because today we have a lot to get to. No more housekeeping. Housekeeping could simply take up too much time on one of these videos. So today we're going to talk about a really interesting concept called dry versus wet reading. Dry versus wet reading. immediately when I first conceived of this idea, when I told it to my partner, she was like, is there a sexual innuendo in there somewhere? I thought to myself, how do we define dry or wet? Of course we can think about it sexually, but at the same time we can think of it in terms of alcohol consumption. Bear with me here. We're opening up a whole can of worms here. So recently, I've been reading Mark Forsyth's A Short History of Drunkenness. And Mark Forsyth is also the author of The Elements of Eloquence, which I've talked about in the last video on the figures of speech and figures of language and figures of rhetoric. It's a less popular video because I think that's quite a niche topic, but nevertheless, a lot of you guys watched that video, really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed Mark Forsyth's works. And I thought to myself, I'm going to give this book a crack. And the first page of this book completely gripped me into a different way to view drinking. Now, in Australia here, the legal drinking age, I think it's around 18. But honestly, I started sneaking ciders, or my dad precisely, I think, more specifically, started sneaking cider cans into my room when I was 14. Not that we're not that we're exactly alcoholic family, but, sometimes there's a family gathering, the lines start to blur, and in Australia here, drinking is a really big part of the Australian culture. Going to the pub and getting a drink at the end of the day, getting a cocktail at a bar, there's just a certain kind of community where there's an unspoken rule about when to drink and when not to drink. And of course, when I travel to London, surprise, surprise, the drinking culture in London is, not dissimilar to the Australian drinking culture, where maybe on a Friday night, the pubs all start to open up and you go to the pub with your friends, you get a Guinness, you split the G, and you have a good time, right? So those are the sort of unspoken cultural conventions around drinking in Anglosphere cultures. It's basically Monday morning, you bring your ass to work, you work as sober and as hard as possible, so that on Fridays and Saturdays or Sundays, be careful with the Sundays because you might still be hungover for Monday, which is not exactly great for going to work on Monday. But generally speaking, Anglosphere cultures have this tendency, especially covered by from some of the passages in this book, which I really recommend you to read. We have this tendency to reserve drinking for Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, or for special occasions. You go to a wedding on Wednesday night, it's fine, you can drink there. But sometimes, if you ever see someone out on the terrace drinking a champagne at 10 a.m., there's just kind of unconscious judgment that we cast on people over here. There's this unconscious kind of like, you shouldn't really be drinking right now. Or like, what if you want to do some work in the afternoon? What if you screw up your sleep pattern so you can't get up for work the next day? So there's this kind of idea that day drinking is something that we kind of look down upon. Day drinking is something that's potentially going to disrupt your whole day. Day drinking is the instability that you should not introduce as a part of your 5-day work week sort of situation. And I've observed many spectrums of this. I had a time during the summer where I was working essentially full-time during Christmas in a retail job. And yeah, I couldn't find a lot of time to drink during that period. But for my normal job, which is creating YouTube videos and writing newsletters for you guys, I have more of a creative control over how I spend my time. But even that, I feel like, culturally, it's something so ingrained that, during a normal day, I think to myself, my blood alcohol level shouldn't be above 0.00 in case I get breathalyzed, because now I also got my probationary license. I'm not allowed to drink a drop of alcohol when I'm driving. There's this unconscious sort of pattern that starts to emerge where people, especially in the Anglosphere, we tend to reserve drinking for, these allocated times. And that is what Mark Forsyth denoted as a dry culture's way of drinking. Now, dry culture doesn't exactly mean this entire culture, abhors alcohol, thinking that it's something sinful, thinking that it's something that we should not partake in under any circumstance, right? It's something that should be reserved for the evening. It's something that should be reserved for the weekends. And that's essentially what a dry culture is. It's something that involves a bit of, prohibition here and there during the week, And it essentially views drinking as a force of chaos that's going to disrupt your normal day to day life. And then something happened last year around June, and a year before, also around June. I went to Paris, and Paris was such an amazing city. First time when I was there, it was for a holiday. Second time when I was there, it was for work. So and I started noticing that Parisians are so comfortable with drinking 10 a.m. in the morning, right? And I remembered it so distinctly. It was like my second last day in Paris, last June or last June or July, and I sat down. I was about to have my breakfast, and at the table next to me, this couple they were drinking champagne or prosecco or something, and it was around 11 a.m. And I thought to myself, that's completely outrageous to think of from for example, from Australia, from the United States. That's virtually unthinkable, right? They either have to be unemployed, they either have to just be someone who has no responsibilities to drink like that at 11 a.m. But then again, because I understand a decent amount of French, they were on work calls when they were drinking those bottles of Prosecco or bottles of champagne, whatever they were drinking at the time. And that completely shifted how I thought about drinking. And it wasn't until I started reading this book that things become kind of clear to me. Things on a continent, or more broadly, a continental way of life, that's considered a wet culture. So, wet culture is this weird kind of culture where alcohol is just like a glass of water. Alcohol should be blended into your everyday life. Alcohol should be a sort of a what's the word? A fertilizer for social interactions, right? So sometimes when you feel awkward, it's fine, no matter what time of day it is, 12 a.m. or 12 p.m., whatever you choose to do so, you can drink. And whatever you drink, no one passes even a sliver of judgment if you drink in a wet culture during the day, or if you drink on a Monday night, or if you drink during your 3-hour work break during lunch. The most amount of work break that we get here is about an hour, and that is an unpaid break. But somehow in continental cultures, I might be drawing too broad of a generalization here, so leave me corrections down below. I've only been to a few countries in Europe. Dublin, I've been to Marseille, I've been to Paris. And in all these cultures, drinking has just slipped into everyday living. There's not much of a hard boundary around when you should drink, and there's not exactly this concern with alcohol really taking over your life. Alcohol really disrupting your daily rhythms. And also, another thing is, this is something that I completely did not expect to find, which is that on average, people who reserve drinking for the weekends, actually, at least from my anecdotal experiences, they tend to drink a lot more than people who just sprinkle alcohol in throughout the week, right? So dry culture, paradoxically, have so much this repressed kind of drinking force that they need to get absolutely sloshed over the weekend. But wet culture is just sprinkled in throughout the week. They don't even notice it. They don't even view it as something specifically harmful, or they don't really view it as anything that needs to be fussed about, fussed over. And that is the distinction between wet and dry culture. And that's such an interesting sort of caveat, or such an interesting fact that I just wanted to share. And how does that relate to reading? So we went on this whole voyage about, dry versus wet culture of drinking. Let's come back to reading. What I've observed is that reading habits can also be placed in two categories: dry reading versus wet reading. Now, I know what you're thinking. We're not condoning, or you can read whatever you want, but we're not encouraging you to read more smut books or like pornographic novels. That's not the case at all. But we're simply saying that a lot of people, when they think of reading as this kind of scary thing. Like, it's something that I have to reserve for the weekends. It's something that I have to carve out 3 hours to do. And you think of someone who's well-read, you think to yourself, you have this image of someone in a robe with a pipe and with a little glass of scotch, and there they are with classical music playing in the background, and they're kind of like reading, something extremely cultivated, like they're reading Marcel Proust on a Friday night, and they're just in that world for 4 to 5 hours, completely immersed in it. And of course, all of us want that life, but unfortunately, that's not our lives. We have to work. I have to work. Even, some of the times I think to myself, even though I made reading and researching and presenting ideas into a full time job, it's still really challenging to find those gaps of time throughout my day and my week to just have those uninterrupted reading time. And so it's a challenge, right? And it's really challenging to even reserve a few hours over the weekend. And when I see these people boasting about how, ooh, I read, 120 books this year, I'm like, yeah, but that's not the life that we lead. That's not exactly realistic for most people. And that's what I would denote, or that's what I would call the dry reading culture, where you think of reading as this insurmountable grand ritual involving robes and pipes and scotch or whatever you smoke if you're into cigars. It involves this elaborate ritual before you can actually get down to some decent reading. But if we take a closer look, what is reading but staring at words on a page? And why are we so busy setting up these external conditions for us to ease into a book? Is it because you find reading difficult and you need a silent space to do it? Maybe. Is it because you like the ritualistic aspects of it? Maybe. But what I'm willing to argue is that it's actually more realistic for people to adopt a wet approach to reading. Coming off of the wet drinking cultures, where you get to sprinkle bits of reading throughout your day. And in aggregation, you're actually going to end up reading more consistently throughout the weeks, throughout the months, even if you're busy, that is. You get to sprinkle these in, and you get to basically maybe indulge in a 1 to 2 hour reading session over the weekend, but that's not essential because you've set up the system or you've set up the habit to engage with a different form of media. And I'm here to challenge another conception, which is that I don't know why people view books as this scary kind of thing that needs these grand rituals to perform, right? It's almost like you're reading some sort of spell book. You need to set up candles and stuff to read it. But notice that you read all the time, right? I spend a lot of time on Substack. I read a lot on Substack. And it's so natural just to pull out my phone and read an article and read what I've saved on Substack. And it's so easy for me just to switch on a news app and read the news with all the atrocities that are happening in the news. But why is it the case that when the format switches to something physical, like a book or an audiobook, why is it then so much more difficult for us to make that mind switch to say, hey, we actually read all the time as a culture. Information is so available right now. You read more than you think. It's just probably not, the information is just probably not as satiating as reading something as a book. And it's really important for us to jump out of that mind frame of books are scary things. We need all these complicated things. I'm guilty as charged. I do sometimes overcomplicate this act of reading, but my intention has always been to give you tools and perspectives to deepen your reading experience. But today we're kind of going back to the basics. Reading should just be like opening up an online blog post. To read a few pages out of it, dip in and out. If it captures your attention, keep going. If it doesn't, well, let's move on to another book. And you should be able to find a way to make the conceptual leap, that reading is not some grand ritual that you should only reserve for the weekends, for a weekend away in the woods, or something that you need to set up these elaborate routines for. Sometimes it's as easy as reading 5 pages during your 1 hour long work break. Sometimes it's as easy as making a switch. Instead of checking out a few reels on Instagram, you switch it up and you pick up a book. And I've been doing the same thing. Kind of funny, huh? I've been doing the same thing with this book. It's a pretty short book. It's around 220 pages. And I dipped in and out when I had a free moment here and there. And I sort of, read the chapters that caught my fancy. And I really enjoyed my reading experience. And I've only been reading this for a week, and I'm almost done with it. And of course, if you're reading this way, completion, there wouldn't be as much of an emphasis on completion. You wouldn't find yourself driving yourself crazy about, I haven't finished that book, I need to move on to another book. But if you find a way to weave reading as a part of your life, if you somehow made the conceptual switch that you're already reading a lot on your phone anyway, why don't we just switch it up into something more interesting to read? then you are going to slowly embrace this wet style of reading, where you get to essentially view books as a supplement to your life. Because that's essentially what it is. A lot of people base their entire lives on books, right? You have a lot of I don't know, people who identify themselves through what they read. And I'm like, but actually, they're supposed to supplement who you already are. And the best books are supposed to disappear into your life. The lessons that you learn from these books, they're supposed to make their way into your life so as to completely change how you see the world. And the best books that I've ever read, they've shifted my perspective so much so that now I take some of those lessons as common sense. It doesn't have to be something that you have to hold up like a placard. You don't have to yell at people and say, oh, this is what I'm reading. It's simply something for you. It's simply something you enjoy, and it's simply something that should delight you and only you. And one of the ways to do that is to find a way to make the leap, turn from a dry reader to a wet reader. And that is all I want to talk about for this week. And hope you guys have enjoyed that little ramble into the history of drinking and how that connects to our reading habits. And I really want to see what you guys thought of this topic. Are you a dry reader or a wet reader? Leave me your comments down below, and we will be back next Wednesday for another episode like this. So don't go anywhere. 6 p.m. your time and 8 a.m. Australian time. I'll see you back here with more. Robin Walden here. I'll see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.